Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great at the minute. Sorry if I sound a little bit different at the moment. I'm not too well. I'm pretty sure it's not coronavirus because I've already had the vaccination. I had the Pfizer one about 10 days ago. So I should have some resistance, so I know it's supposed to take up to about 2 weeks to have full antibodies to defend against it. But with my luck I'd probably still catch it again anyway. But that's another note. If anyone's worried about it or the side effects, don't worry too much, because I've had mine and I've literally had nothing go wrong since, and even my arm didn't really bruise too bad. I got it very early, and I was probably one of the first 23-year-olds in the world to get it, because I work in a hospital, so they had to give me it first. But annoyingly, where I'm in London, it's the worst place in the whole UK for it at the minute, where we've got a mutant strain. But I'm still good. And I'm vaccinated, so I'm not worried anymore. But yeah, so sorry if I sound different at all. And if you are thinking of getting the Pfizer vaccine or any of them, don't worry about the side effects too much, because I've had it and I'm fine. I'll keep people updated on how I am, but at least you got 10 days in the bank. And before the video starts, there's a message as always. So I hope you enjoyed these stories and I hope you're doing great. So for today, I just want to share this I think can help people. So be very mindful of the amount of stress you put yourself under in your head, and realize that there are going to be times that your defenses are lower and things are going to be a bit harder. So I don't really get it so much now, but I used to get it where if I was unwell and already stressed out, I'd be a lot more liable to have anxiety, and my social anxiety could be a lot worse. So when this would happen, I'd make sure I reduced my stress overall, because holistically this made a big difference to me. And it could really help me get through my days. And also just understanding that it's important to work very hard in life, but not to put too much pressure on yourself. You have to realize that your mind's your most powerful weapon, and it can work for or against you, because you can just have one thought that can set yourself off, where your heart starts racing, you start panicking and your hands get sweaty. And this is just an idea that you might have or thought that's caused it. So it shows you how much power there is in what's not even live information. At the same time, you can flip that and not let things stress you out or make you panic. And life's going to be a lot easier then. You have to think that you don't really need stress in your life, and a lot of it is actually a choice. You can still produce the exact same output to your day without letting the outcome stress you, knowing that you've done your best and gave your all, and that's all you can do. The rest of it's out of your control, so it's a lot easier, I find, just to focus on giving my best and not worrying about the rest of it. It's something that made a really big difference to my life, and I really hope can help people. I hope that made sense with the way I said it. So I hope you're all doing great, and I love you, and I believe in you, and you're not alone. Enjoy these stories. And make sure you check out my Instagram at Joe the Insomniac. And check out the podcast in the description below. I love you and take care. When I first returned from the war, I was a power line rigger. This was on EHV lines, which are extra high voltage, the kind on top of the steel towers. Those are transitional lines, not sub-transitional like most inner city lines. So anyway, I had a job during a heavy windstorm in 2008 to go out and repair some lines near Colorado and the New Mexico border. It was great pay since it was an emergency call out, so I agree. I met up with my crewman and head down from the Colorado Springs area. We get there at around 9 PM and start getting to work. Windstorms are notorious for failing lines, but not EHV or UHV lines, since they are rigged differently. When I crane up to see the broken link on the tower and inspect the damage, I remembered seeing over the tops of most trees. I observed the view for a moment and saw some nearby lights from a campfire. As soon as I saw the lights, I hear yelling coming from that area. Now it must have been about 300 yards away, but I hear a woman yelling. She kept saying, "Someone please help," over and over again. I craned down and started yelling for the guys. They heard it too, and were asking questions. This is really odd. We never see anyone out there. I told them about the campfire lights coming from the direction our trucks were facing. We jump in one of the smaller trucks, since it's a 4x4, and head down the road. We look everywhere for the light, but don't see a thing. We drove back and forth, and then back again and slowed down. We rolled down the windows and stopped the truck in the area where the light should be. We all heard moaning sounds coming from the right of our trucks, so to the north. It sounded like two people are having heart attacks, and I mean really loud. So now we're on edge. The site supervisor was calling the police now. Given the general area we're at, they told us to check to see if we feel safe. Because I have the war veteran attitude, I decided to look. Two guys came down with me, and our supervisor stayed with the truck to wait for police. Apparently, they had a station not too far, like 15 minutes or so away. I armed myself with a pickaxe, and the other guys had conduit pipes like 1 inches. We all started walking through the trees with our headlamps on, because it got really dark now. The moaning's still coming from ahead of us. We got through the trees into a small clearing. It looks empty. The moaning stopped. We checked around and hear nothing. We went back to the truck, and as soon as we got there, we heard the woman yelling again, yelling the same thing. "Someone please help." It was just to the north of where we were. One of the guys yelled back saying, "Where are you?" and gets no reply. Then we hear her scream in pain, and nothing else. We're already running back north and called the police, but they've showed up. They must have seen us running north because 2 of them came after us. We stopped in the field area, and they stopped with us and asked what was going on. We told them. They helped us look around and saw nothing. We walked back to the truck and didn't hear anything else. They said they would hang out for us and check if anything else happened, so we get working again. The police are now parked next to each other, talking while we worked. When I craned up, I can't see any campfire lights or anything. We did the job. Took about an hour and a half until we're done. When we were packing our tools to head out, one of the cops left, and the other comes with us. He told us that just to the west, there was a small plane that crashed, and people burned to death. He said the police and paramedics got to the scene, and the fire's still going. He told us about how 2 bodies were found away from the plane, crawling away from it, and one of the bodies is still there somewhere buried from the 70s or 80s. Yeah, we packed up fast and got the hell out of there. Now, I never saw a fire, just light on the trees. Now, I can't tell you how creepy that stuff is to find out afterwards. And the voices and moans were so clear. I always kind of believed in the afterlife after this, but God, did it mess my head up. I'm so glad other people were there to experience it though. The cop believed us too. But didn't hear anything about reports of a fire or anything else in the area afterwards. Back when I was a Boy Scout, I took a weekend-long training course called National Youth Leadership Training. One of the last parts of the course was an overnight hike into the woods, with no guide, to find our designated campsite and see how we would work under stress. We finally got to our campsite and began to unpack. We each bought a tent, but half of us left ours behind to lighten the load and buddied up. Lo and behold, my buddy brought a one-man tent only, Either I slept outside or things are going to be really cramped and I didn't want that. The sky was clear and I slept under the stars. The next morning, 4 of the other guys claimed that they saw a coyote walk up to me, sniff my face, stare at me, and leave. They were too scared to go and make it leave. They stuck to their guns though, but I didn't believe them. 4 years later, I was working at the camp as a staff member, and I'm speaking to a senior there, and apparently he said coyotes are pretty common there, and they often boldly show up. It made me realise what the guys were saying wasn't a lie. I just can't believe they let me sleep with a coyote literally at my face. God knows what would have happened if I'd woken up. I went camping with some friends near Lochmond in Scotland. We set up camp about 3 miles into the woods near a small river and got the fire going to cook some food we brought with us. The site is very remote, but in the evening a couple of guys hiked through and stopped to chat with us. They're from Poland and seem friendly enough, but ask a lot of questions about our group, how many we were, etc. And I'm a bit suspicious, but I put it down to being from different cultures. It's around 10 PM. I start to feel very ill, and I'm thinking, is it possibly from food poisoning? Now, I'm very confused about this because I'm sure the food was cooked correctly. My friends are all pretty drunk, and I had drunk about 4 or 5 cans of Budweiser. Stupidly, I packed my bag after throwing up hard for 15 minutes and decided to hike back to the main road, watching light fading in the distance. I'm about a mile into the hike back. At this point, I've been sick twice and am completely sobered up by throwing up so much. I've got sports bottles full of water. I now stop to rinse my mouth out. At this point, it's near pitch black, so I got into my bag to get out my torch, small knife and my .22 air gun. As I start zipping my bag back up, I hear twig snap nearby and assume it's a rabbit or fox. I shine my torch, but there's nothing. This doesn't make sense because surely I'm at least going to see reflective eyes, but oh well. 5 minutes later, I hear what sounds like running, maybe 100 yards behind me, and lots of twigs snapping. I turn around and assume it's my friend, and I say, "Are you kidding me?" I said I knew someone's there, and I'm not joking. I see movement through the trees probably 80 feet away. Whatever this is big. I mean 6 or 7 feet tall and completely black. At this point, my sickness is gone, and my heart's beating through my chest. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I get this feeling that I can only describe as feeling almost dizzy at the surreal position that I found myself in. I take off my rucksack and hang it up. I kill my torch. I still think it's my friends, but I have this horrible feeling. It was too big. I've got my knife though in my jacket pocket, and my pistol gripped harder than I can possibly ever do normally. I walk in the darkness for about 100 yards and stop dead behind a tree and wait. I'm trying my hardest to control my breathing, but it's supremely difficult now. Sure enough, I hear movement again. Very difficult to pinpoint, but it's getting closer. Now I'm caught in 2 minds, to continue to hide or confront. I decide the latter, and now I burst out from the brush. I'm in 2 minds, but I have to run now. I point my torch in the general direction of the sound, and there's branches moving. I start moving away from the area like an SAS trooper. I hear distance movement again. Lots of twigs breaking now, from heavy footprints. I don't see anyone now, but I know I'll shoot them. Silence now. I wait a few minutes and head back for my backpack. It's not hanging over the branch anymore. It's on the ground. That's the scariest part for me. Whatever I've been chasing could have never beaten me back to my bag. So something or someone else moved it. The branch is intact, which doesn't make sense either. At this point, I travel out onto the main road pretty sharp with no incident. I call my fiance, who quickly picks me up, and I'm violently sick. I believe it's from fear. I tell her about what happened and she's freaking out. To this day, I still don't know exactly what happened. I do know I was terrified and I'd never experienced anything like it before or since. I've had a truly weird encounter before. I lived in Southern California at the time, up in the San Gabriel Mountains, a couple of hours east of LA. I know when people think of Cali, they all seem to think of the beaches, but I assure you, the land here is very diverse. My hometown is super tiny and has a fairly popular ski resort on the western side of town. If you take the only highway out past the ski resort for several miles, there's literally nothing but forest. And a very old gold mine is actually still there, and it's kind of cool. After those things, there's nothing but national forest. And then, one insanely isolated, very old restaurant that still functions, and then back to the forest for a long time. Anyway, just setting the scene. I was about 10 or 11 when this happened. It's almost Christmas. It snowed heavily, and the snow's still falling on the evening of this happening. My stepdad decided that we would cut down our own Christmas tree this year, so we get into my mum's big Dodge truck and headed off to the mine, which is a couple of miles past the ski resort. We got to the base of the road and were talking and laughing, etc. My stepdad was driving pretty slow since it was snowing decently. They had ploughed part of this road recently too, and there were big snow berms on either side of us, down near up to the top of the truck, probably 8 feet off the ground. So it's just barely getting dark now. Not quite dark, but twilight, I guess. So not dark enough that we can't see anything, but dark enough that the headlights of the truck are on. Quite suddenly, from over on my side, there comes a huge dark shape that arches over the top of the snow berm. It lands in the middle of the road fairly gracefully almost. My stepdad slams on the brakes. I am too stunned to speak or even scream, because there crouching in the middle of the road is some creature. It has a long muzzle and pointy ears, covered in fur. Now, I have really never seen anything like it. This all happens in seconds. The thing jumps down and crouches, glancing at us. My stepdad slams on the brakes, and then it just vaulted up and over the beam and disappeared. It must have been 6 or 7 feet tall. I have never seen anything quite like it. My stepdad refused to talk about it when I asked, terrified. If he had seen the same thing too, I knew he did because how quick he braked, and that he was wide-eyed and white for the rest of the journey. I never did bring it up again because we hadn't had the best relationship since then, but sometimes I wish I could know what actually happened then. It still shakes me to my very core, even to this day. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and tons of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. Or there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places. A lot of the people from where I am are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I do a lot of work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of them small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there for too long. No opportunities or chances for the people that fairly deserve it. And nothing for miles around, like honestly, you're trapped there. I hated it. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service for miles or houses. In the past, there's been a lot of vehicle break-ins on the trailheads. I mean, literally, the gravel there is littered with bits of broken glass from what I can only assume is break-ins. Sometimes, there's really shifty people hanging around those trailheads or just driving around out on the forest roads. There are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat up $500 cars barreling along them that are meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 friends of mine and I decided to play paintball in the national forest. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip, so we can play the next morning also. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the most popular camping spots. Sadly, a church group or something had taken off all the spots. This really got us annoyed. This was really the only camping spot that we're familiar with, and it's getting late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further into the woods. By now, it's getting dark, and we're getting worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but no service of course. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That being said, it looked like a 4x4 had been going over the mound, so it's worn now. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over it. Now, there was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove for a few miles down the road, coming across an opening next to a creek. There were some blue traps hanging over a plywood nailed to a tree. That's odd. That said, it was pretty much dark now, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running, and we set up in the tent. After we set up, I start noticing there's a lot of trash in the woods. I see a green bottle on the ground. I took a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of some home and garden insecticide. I was really tired now and thought someone was dumping some garbage here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage here when we're more than an hour away from the nearest home. We set up camp, have some beers and made chili from scratch. By this time, it's probably 11 PM and we're eating. we noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles don't make sense. It seemed like it was far too bright and wasn't moving. It's a kind of glow you see over a big bright city, and we don't see the light source itself. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it's not campers. The hill was about a quarter of a mile from our campsite, and we investigate. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have done it. However, we had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us decide to look. My other friend decides to stay. He's gonna do some popcorn on the fire. So we start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. It could have been beavers, but why would they go all the way around a tree in a perfect circle? We start talking about the ghost in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top, my friend falls and yells out. A few seconds later, the light goes out. We look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what it is after all. Walking back in silence and keep on looking back every few seconds, we decide to turn off our flashlights and return to the campsite with the moonlight guiding us. We get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite. I can see my other friend Isaac walking around. He's wearing a hooded coat that I've never seen him wear before. For some reason, he has a paintball gun. That seems odd. We look at each other. The fire's dying down. We don't see the campsite well. Now, we've been gone for an hour. From the distance, it appears as though my friend is looking for something. He kept walking around the site and peering in. When we're almost back to the campsite, we see our friend walk up the road we came from. We figure he's went to the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to our fire waiting for him to return. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent and vomits. After we left, he had a few more drinks apparently. We ask him why he's wandering around with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange face and says, "They're locked in the cab of the truck." "Did you unlock it?" "No." We go to the truck and enter the door code and see our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck are hidden underneath a magnetic fob. I get a sinking feeling. What were you doing after we left? I watched a movie then fell asleep. But wait, you were walking around with a paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? He said he'd been in the tent the whole time, wearing the same unhooded fleece. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't him. At this point, of course, we're all too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent, we just fold it with the sleeping bags and think, heck, jumping in the F-150. When we get up to the dirt hump, we see something grey blocking our path. The metal barrier that's been laying in the woods is now erect. By this point, we've all sobered up. No one wants to get out of the car to try and move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of my truck, so I slowly tap it. It falls over, and we drive very slowly over it, terrified we're going to pop one of the tyres and be stranded. It didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it on the moonlight. I now begin to drive as quick as I possibly can. The vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It just stays 1 or 2 turns behind us, but always follows. After 45 minutes of speeding, we get back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my home and decide to go a different way. I've never experienced anything like it in my life. Rural camping can be very dangerous, and we've never went back there since. I've worked for a company who does contract work exclusively for the US Forest Service in surveying areas for invasive plants, and we basically travel all over the forest in SoCal, even in areas that are off limits to the public. I have many stories to share that fell into the category of being creepy. I have my story to tell. So my crew at work is basically between 5 and 6 people every day. The same people for 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. Like I said, we sweep through the forest by combining a search team looking for invasive plants and putting down a GPS tracker on their location to be removed. I remember one day when I started, we came across this abandoned day use area where there had obviously been some sketchy stuff going on. Now we used to park the car in a turnout across from it and eat lunch, and several cars would drive into the area over the curb. Because the main driveway was blocked with a big metal gate, people got out of their cars, some walking their dogs, some taking pictures, some for picnics, and some people just carried stuff and disappeared into the area. For a while, we had kind of skipped over the area because, according to my boss, no invasive plants have ever been tracked in the day use area, so we didn't go there. Nevertheless, it was still sketchy as hell. We would constantly drive by it and see people dumping things. What ended up happening was the crew got called to another part of the forest for a while, and we were probably out of that area for a few months, only coming back sporadically. But we drove down that same road every day and still saw cars parked there and stuff being dumped. So one day, my boss tells me that we need to walk the almost 7-mile stretch of road that day. He asks for volunteers to cover the sides of the road, which cuts through a narrow canyon, only 500 feet wide. The day use area was on the right side of the road, so I volunteered to go right with my other 2 workers, with plans on checking the area out extensively. We took our tools with us, which consisted of hoes, some folding saws, and pulaskis, which are basically a 2-headed axe with a pick on the end. Additionally, I was wearing my knife on my belt. So we started walking into the day use area, and I'm scanning for all signs of life. There's a bunch of abandoned stuff laying everywhere, like refrigerators, storage shelves, and broken glass everywhere. There's also several holes in the ground that were perfect squares, cut into the concrete, and they gone down pretty far. They weren't that big though, probably 4x4. So we kept walking back, and I see these rags scattered on the ground. Some have red stains on them. They're next to a big pile of dirt that's covered with stones and half a skateboard sticking out of the ground. There's a wooden cross nearby, and I'm thinking, is this some kind of grave? So I call the other guys over, and we read the writing on the skateboard, and it was a burial site for something that was once called a diamond. I couldn't make out the years on it, but the grave's big. One of my co-workers thought it was an animal grave. I chalk it up to being something that a dog owner's left there. We kept pushing through, and I'm seeing tons of invasive plants everywhere. I'm reading off the names to co-workers who's putting them into a GPS unit when we see a building tucked into the corner of the day use area. So we walk back there, and there's a tiny opening between the rocks, barely noticeable from the road, and it turns out to be a whole nother canyon branched off. We check the map and make sure there is a canyon near here where invasive plants could be coming from. The GPS shows nothing. We have to check it now. It's about the size of half a shipping container, clearly abandoned. The door is slightly opened. I reached out with the hoe and pried it open. It's pitch black. My co-worker takes out his phone, and there's some really weird stuff in there. There was tons of weird magazines on the floor, pillows and blankets, as well as children's clothing. I back up and start walking back to the main road. There's clothes everywhere belonging to adults. This is scaring the life out of me. I'm not about to go in there. When I get back in view of the road, there's a truck in the day use area that's not none of ours. I don't see anyone using the picnic areas, and the weird thing is, the truck had driven over the curb to bypass the gate, and was parked in a secluded area. It didn't look like anyone was in the truck or around it, and I stay in the clearing waiting for my co-workers. When we finally got to the spot, I point out the truck to them, and they said he's probably hanging out in the old bathroom building which is off to the side of the road. They wanted to go in and check it out. I sure as hell don't want to leave them and be alone, so I follow. The building was kind of V-shaped, with male and female bathrooms on the end and a storage in the middle. They go into the men's room, whose door had literally been kicked down by someone, and apparently there was tons of illegal magazines all over the floor, tons of weird pictures of things that I'm not even gonna say, with pillows and blankets. There was a small hole that had been cut into the wall leading into the small storage room. It sounded like they were literally gonna try and crawl into the room for the bathroom to check it out. At this point, I was standing outside the building on the other end of the door to the storage room, and I'm not kidding you, I hear the doorknob jiggle. At that moment, my co-workers came running out of the bathroom, and one of them grabs his knife and brings it up. He quickly grabs another tool and bashes the door handle and the area around the door to the storage room. 15 seconds later, we see a man sprint out of the bathroom and run back further into the woods. Apparently, this is what happened. One of my co-workers stuck his head through the cut hole in the men's bathroom. It's pitch black. He uses his phone and sees there's a man there alone in the corner, boxes lined up with pillows and blankets on the floor. It startled him so much that he ran out too, as well as the other guy. We've radioed up some of the hotshot firefighters who had a station nearby for support, and they sent a few guys and literally took a chainsaw to the door, set up a floodlight, and the room is filled with boxes and photos of really bad stuff. We told them where the man ran off to into the other building, so they went to check it out as well. Opened the door, floodlights on, and the creepiest thing out of the whole experience was that the building actually went back further into the dirt at the adjacent hills. The firefighters checked their photography maps, and sure enough, there was a bunker, and nobody went further into that place. Now, I've been homeless a lot, and I've lived in some distant families' land where they have an old cabin upon slits. Due to the local woods flooding heavily sometimes, I spend a good amount of time in this old cabin. There's a wood stove and a swing hanging from the porch. I use that as a bed sometimes. Overall, it was an okay place, and it wasn't too far of a drive from town to get food. You just have to tolerate the half-mile walk to your car. So anyway, one day I'm out walking around the woods, and in a smallish clearing in the path, I see easily a good 50 to 60 dead geese. Every one of them is mangled in horrifying ways. Necks ripped off their bodies, blood everywhere, feathers for the life of me, bones sticking out of the dirt. It looks like a genocide. The ground is dry, and there's lots of dust, but I saw no prints, and there was no other evidence of anything ever being there, aside from what I can only assume was some sort of explosion. I also found a torn open old backpack with a great deal of candy wrappers strewn about. Way too mouldy to identify or know anything of. I decide to turn back to see if I can grab a camera when I start hearing this god-awful shrieking sound, as if it was coming from every possible place. I took off pretty fast when it started, and to this day, my best guess is that it's a massive fume of toxins, or maybe it was from some massive animal. I really can't get a rational explanation here, and it really scares me. A mate of mine and his cousin decided to go on a motorbike trip around Australia. Unfortunately, on the second day, the cousin's wallet falls out of his back pocket, and it was only hundreds of kilometers later that he realizes. Now, the two of them were forced to rely on only one guy's money, since all of the bank branches refused to give out money to my cousin with no ID, which of course is in his wallet. Matters were complicated later when they filled up with non-sniffable Opal petrol, which buggered up their engines and required them to pay a mechanic to fix it. The end result was that they had almost no money, and any money left had to be rationed for petrol. They're eating 2-minute noodles for every meal and sleeping rough. In some towns in the middle of nowhere, they would go to the local pub just for warmth and company, but couldn't afford a beer. So one night, they stopped at a town that consisted of a handful of houses, a caravan park, and a hotel. When they went into the hotel, they met all of the locals, including the local cop and the owner of the caravan park. Mr. Caravan Park started talking with them and was getting pretty chummy because he knew that his was the only place offering accommodation and camping in that area that was legal due to the presence of crocs. Realizing that if they planned on camping illegally, they could get tipped off to the police, they decided to sneak out without anyone realizing and head out of town. They were hoping to find some shelter, but it was featureless red dirt as far as the eye can see. After about 20 minutes, they came to a bridge and hid their bikes under it to set up camp, even though they're in the middle of nowhere. Roads, trains would come by on a regular basis, and were loud enough even from a distance. The next morning, they went back to the pub to get water and noticed some old photos on the wall. One of them featured a very large crocodile. In the background was a bridge that they were sleeping under. I was on summer break and went camping with my friend and his parents. We went to the lake during the day and did the s'mores thing at night. His parents shared a tent while my friend and I had our own. I can't remember where our campsite was, and I'm not really in contact with my friend anymore. But 15 years later, I'm assuming it wasn't the safest place to go camping. Here's why. I woke up sometime in the early morning at like 3 or 4 AM and immediately saw a man's face looking in through the tent that he had unzipped at the door, sticking his head through with this absolutely insane look on his eyes. With wild hair. I'm literally stiff with fear. I can't do anything but look at the man, who's very slowly moving his head from left to right, as if this isn't bad enough. I guess my friend could hear my breathing loudly or something because he woke up too, having the same reaction as me, just laying there looking in terror at this mysterious man. And I'm not certain for how long he was actually sitting there, but it felt like it was hours, moving his head back and forth. At some point, we heard a noise close by. Oh God, there's more, I think to myself, literally shaking. But apparently, it's not with the man. He quickly disappears a couple of minutes later. We got out of our tent and woke up his parents, but the guy was long gone. What's more crazy about this is the guy didn't even blink. He literally just shook his head from left to right, staring at us shaking. I've never seen anything so terrifying in my life, and I really don't want to again. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 6 and my sister was 11. We were camping with our grandparents on a campground we went to often, in a tent trailer we always used. We had been there for a few nights, having no problems at all. If you're not familiar with a tent trailer, the kind my family owns has 2 queen-size beds that fold outwards off the trailer, and we're somewhat suspended. We have a tarp over our head attached with hooks underneath to the base. Now in the middle of the night when we're all asleep, a man come into our campground and unhooked some of the tarp under my bed. He reaches his hand in and starts feeling around. I woke up to the feeling of someone touching my hair. Assuming it's my sister, I don't react for a few seconds. She suddenly jerks up, and we both realise there's a hand wrapped around her arm, and that a man's whispering, "Shh." Hysterically, we both start screaming for our lives. My sister and I start bending his fingers backwards, hoping to make him stop. My grandpa then wakes up for our screaming, and figures out what's happening, and my grandfather furiously ran outside, but no one's there. The man's gone. Now thank God this was our last night there, and we were leaving in the morning. Needless to say, we would have left anyway. I'm just so glad that my granddad actually woke up and was able to help us. If it was just us there alone, I would have hated to think of what could have happened. Me and my father always went fishing. Heck, it's something we still do now. We live in the backwoods community, so nature's always around us. I've later moved into the city life, but whenever I'm staying with my mum and dad, I always like to go doing hunting or fishing with my father. Now from being out in the wilderness for so long, you truly get used to what's around you. My dad, being so seasoned, always had an explanation for something weird that would happen. However, there was one time something happened that was so weird that neither of us could explain it, even to this day. So I was 18 at the time. We were doing some night fishing in a lake, something that I absolutely loved to do. We're having a great time, just talking about life and things in general. I was actually planning to move to the city around that time, so we spent a long time talking about that. And my dad was saying that maybe when I'm older I should come back to the forest and get back to nature, but he understood the opportunities that moving out into the city offered me, and I was really excited. Now, as we're saying this, the moon seems to be shining really bright. It was cloud covered at first, so we didn't really see it. As we're sitting there talking, something seems off. We both stop talking at the same time, and I see almost a blue glow on my dad's face. I reach down to see if I have a torch on, and then I notice it. All of the water around us has a very light blue ambient glow, and I'm not kidding you, the entire lake seemed to have this glow to it. Everything around us was silent. I look at my dad, and he's just as scared as I am. We don't say a word, and suddenly, we hear an explosion sound in the sky. I'm terrified. We both jump to the deck, and stay cowering for what feels like an eternity. It's probably only about 10 seconds though. We both slowly raise our heads, and the light's gone, and there's no clouds in the sky. We quickly pull the boat into the harbour and get going home as quick as we possibly can. And to this day, I have no idea what the hell happened. I don't believe in the supernatural or UFOs, but I really think this has to have been something from out of this world. The closest thing I can think is that something carrying some kind of voltage dropped from the sky into the water, explaining the explosion sound, but it doesn't add up. My dad thinks it might have been something extraterrestrial, but I don't know. All I know is that it scared the life out of me, and I've never seen anything like it. These events took place in the spring of 2014. My friend Samantha and Tanny had finally agreed to come camping with me. The problem is that none of us were experienced in surviving the wilderness, but that didn't stop us. We packed up our gear, loaded up on food, alcohol, and made our way to our location. When we arrived at the spot, Sarah had Googled. We realised that we would have to hike for a while in order to find a spot suitable for camping. We hiked for some time before reaching a clearing. We set up camp and started a fire, opening a bottle of tequila. After some drinking and smoking a bit, I decided to start preparing dinner, so I left Samantha and Tanny by the fire as I was separating our dinner. As I was busy separating, I realised a man's approaching our camp. "Hey you there," he said with a thick Irish accent. I was caught off guard as I wasn't expecting to see anyone, but nonetheless, he seems friendly, so I reply, "Oh hey, I didn't even notice you. Been hiking for a while?" "Yeah, for a bit." "What you cooking there?" He gestures to me. I invited him to join us because I'm not rude, and he seems nice. So we walk over to the fire where I introduce him to the others, who seem extremely unimpressed about our new guest. After eating dinner, we kept drinking, but during this time, it was becoming very clear that our guest had really taken a liking to me. He kept trying to move closer to me and was paying little to no attention to my friends. He was only speaking and focusing on me, while drinking his bottle of whiskey. That's when things took a turn and his conversations become weird, making everyone uncomfortable. But it wasn't until he leant over, grabbed the back of my neck and said, "Come on babe, get rid of these two idiots and come into the woods with me," before I could even react. And then, Tanny was already right behind him, trying her best to get him away from me, while screaming like a banshee. I can't remember what she was saying, but she was inventing her own words. It worked. He let go of my neck, took a step back, looked at Tanny, and let out the most sinister smile that I've ever seen. It was something that I can't describe. For that, he had beautiful teeth and a smile, but something about the combination of his eyes just filled me with goosebumps. Even typing this, I'm having the same reaction. He slowly starts walking away from my camp while laughing. I'm absolutely petrified, but decided to quickly tidy up before heading to my tent and hide. I was originally meant to sleep in my own tent while the other two shared, but we all went to the same one. Everything had been quiet for a while, with the exception of Tanny snoring. I was about to fall asleep when I hear twigs crunching and the sounds of footsteps fast approaching us. I lay still, holding my breath, completely immobilized by fear, until I heard my tent being opened, and Samantha let out a scream so loud that it even jolted the Irish psycho, and he jumps back a few steps. Tanny has been woken by this stage, and we're all standing outside the tent. Samantha and Tanny yelling, and I'm fumbling with my phone trying desperately to call the police. He then hits Tanny in the face. I drop everything. I yell, "Run, just run." I held Tanny's arm and don't look back. Importantly, we only have socks on, and we're running through the woods at night, with a psycho chasing us. I ran until I trip over a log, smash my chin down on the ground pretty hard. That's where all three of us stay hidden, low to the ground for a few hours, but it's pitch black. When we felt safe enough, we walked back to the campground and find everything destroyed. Both Samantha and Tanny had everything stolen of value. Weirdly though, my phone is smashed, not even stolen, making me realise how bad his intentions were. I thank my lucky stars I had no documents that could identify me. The last thing I wanted was him knowing where I lived. We don't waste any more time and ran back to our car as fast as possible, occasionally injuring ourselves on the way as we can barely see anything. We get to the car and I'm trying to start the engine, which is doing that sound it makes when it's about to die. When he sees us, he suddenly starts running out of the bushes towards us, laughing. We all scream hysterically and I floor it. God, I'm so scared. I drove like an absolute maniac until we reached the next town over, only to discover that my car's been tampered with and is leaking oil. God, it was done by that psycho. We eventually get picked up by Tanny's dad, taking us to the police station immediately. And unfortunately she broke her jaw in 2 places, and they never found him. I hate the fact that he's not been caught. For all I know, he could still be out there lurking on people, just like he did with us. I know that situation could have ended so much worse. Like I said before, the part I hate in all of this is that he smashed my phone, making sure there was no trace of him or his location. He wasn't even willing to steal the phone because he knew the police could probably track it. God, it makes me sick thinking about this. I was at the office later than normal, but not excessively late. I left at about 6 and realised I needed gas, so I stopped at the 1-2 minutes from my job. It was still light out because of the summer, which made the situation weirder. I go to the gas station, and nothing has happened there before, so I was pretty relaxed, and just tired in general from work. Now while I'm pumping gas, I see a truck pull in, which is kind of rusty with two guys in the front, but perpendicular in the way it's parked, which is weird, but I just keep filling my car so I can head home. The two guys just look like two guys from the country, a bit older, like 40s or 50s, but I felt uncomfortable. The guy driving was talking softly, but I ignored him at first. I didn't realise he was even trying to speak to me. The guy then yelled at me, which catches me off guard. I think I said something along the lines of, "Can I help you?" The driver was motioning for me to come closer to talk, which I didn't because it feels off. The guy finally spoke at a normal level and said they're looking for the shortest covered bridge. The country I'm in is known for this. This wasn't too weird of a question, but it's a little hard to point out without a map. I briefly told the guys the directions from the gas station and was grabbing the receipt. This is when all of the red flags go off in my head. He, the driver, asked me to lead them there now. It was out of the way and I say hell no and get in my car. He then starts screaming at me to get in their truck. Now this really scares me. He then starts to get out of his truck. I haven't got time for this. I floor it. The truck doesn't move, so I have to back out. I was worried about them following me, and they did follow my car, but I quickly take a few random turns and manage to lose them on the highway. Oh, the whole time the passenger was staring at me too. The whole thing was weird to me, but what scared me was that they were trying to get me out in the middle of nowhere to do God knows what to me. I'm just glad I got out of there when I did. I was a little young when this happened, so I don't really remember it. So this is a story my mum has told me. When I was around 5 or 6, my family and a family of friends all went camping together in New Hampshire. Each family had a camper, and we all set up at one campsite. The campground had a playground, a lake nearby, and there was always something going on. One day, me and my friend Keisha, who was around the same age as me, were playing on our campsite as our mums talked outside the camper, keeping their eyes on us. At some point, an old man came walking by our campsite. He seemed like a normal guy according to my mum, but then he started to walk up and start a conversation with our parents. He said he owns a campsite a little way down the path, and that he has his own little playground in the backyard of his camper. He then said to me that my friends are allowed to come over any time that we wanted to play. My friend's mum was oblivious to the situation though, telling him it's a very nice gesture and we can later possibly. My mum on the other hand, who's to say the very least has experience with creeps, shut him down, told him no, go away. He walked away and my friend's mum started asking my mum why it's such a big deal. My mum told her that there's already a playground at the campsite and that we do not go under any circumstances. She even went around to the other campsites to warn people and stay away. Weeks pass, the camping trip is over and everyone's home for the rest of the summer. My mum is doing things around the house when she gets a phone call from her friend from the camping trip. She's freaking out, apologizing, telling her that she'll never go against her judgments again. Turns out, she turned the news on, and there he is. Apparently he got into a local pharmacy trying to get pictures developed, and he had hundreds of pictures of children. So this actually happened today. I live in a pretty nice neighborhood, and compared to the rest of my city, my area is considered safe. Well, I thought that was true until now. Me and my two foster sisters were walking home from school on the route we take every day, and we reached the intersection that we cross to get to our street. It's a very long wait until we're able to cross, and we usually just jaywalk. So me and one of my friends made it across, but my one friend got stuck in the middle with this girl who looks about the same age as us. And she just got off school, not saying anything. She's not saying anything, just kept walking. Now 2 or 3 minutes later, she's coming running behind me, and by then we're at our house, and she tells us to get inside fast, but it takes forever for someone to open the door, and I'm asking her over and over again what's happening. And she just says, I think I was almost human trafficked, and at some point, the girl who was calmly walking down the street started behind us like nothing happened. When we finally got inside, she told me the girl started talking to her, and at first, my friend just thought she was being friendly when she asked what school she went to, but then the red flags began. She asked her who my other friend and I were, and where she was going, and where she lived at, and what her name was, and then she heard a car rev up their engine. She turned around to see a white van parked in a small parking lot across the street with 3 men in it, and the girl also looked, and started speaking faster, asking her if she wanted to walk home with her, and it's only down one street. Finally, the light said walk, and she took off. But that girl now knows where we live. But thankfully, my friend saw the red flags and didn't give away any information, or didn't agree to walk with her. And I know it may sound like maybe this girl was also scared, but when she walked past our house, she looked completely fine, like nothing happened. Like she was just a girl walking home from school. She didn't look at all unusual. We have yet to tell our parents what happened. I just pray I don't see that freaking van. When I was younger, my friends and my brothers would always go camping together. We weren't too old, and we didn't live too far from a big field and lake. It made great camping though, because it was away from things but not too far away from home. We had one incident, however, that is truly unbelievable, and it made us all never go camping again thereafter. So one night, we're all having a great time doing some fishing in the lake. We have our fire going, and we're just talking about random stuff when suddenly, we hear a clicking sound from across the water. Now I can't pin down exactly what it was, but there was something very off about the sound. You could tell an animal wasn't making it, but we're literally the only people there. Anyway, we continue our fishing, and nights fell. What's stranger though, is the clickings persisted for well over an hour now, and that doesn't make any sense. My buddies are starting to get quite paranoid now because it seems to be getting louder. It's almost like, no matter where you go, the clicking seems to follow you. I decide to investigate, and so does my brother, and we both stand up simultaneously. As we get up, we can see a figure across from us on the island in the lake. He looks freaking massive though, like at least 7 feet tall. It's so ridiculous, I don't even think it's a real person. We laugh about it, saying, oh yeah, the tree scared us. But then the clicking starts even louder. We can now see there's a small fire on the island too. That come out of nowhere. Nobody saw it before. That makes no sense. And then it goes out suddenly. We both scream and look at the rest of the camp, who are also gathered on the shoreline looking at what this thing is. And then, almost on cue, the second we stop screaming, it starts again for 4 seconds, then goes out again. And this illuminates a figure slightly. You can't see it well because whatever it is wearing a robe, but it's an actual thing there. The fire goes out again. We all scream and run away from there. I was so scared and worried that my mum or dad would go out to investigate with the other parents and get hurt that I didn't even tell them. Nobody did. Even 15 years on, it still haunts the life out of me to this day. The thing is, we know nobody was on the island because we could see it was clear during the daytime and we never heard a boat go in there. It's literally the worst experience of my life. I even have goosebumps now thinking of it. I distant hike when I can. Sometimes this means getting up early, staying out late, to get as many miles in as I can. Sometimes walking in the pitch dark with a low light headlamp seems spooky. I grew up in the wooded areas. I've slept under a canopy of stars more nights than I can count. I've trekked literally thousands of miles of trails, riverbanks, lake shores, ridge bottoms, bogs and creeks. I've hunted the game. I'm establishing this because this is very important for you to understand. I've seen, heard, smelt all about this region in terms of what it has to offer with wildlife. My scariest experience so happened at about 04:30 in the morning. It was late spring, so the first morning light wouldn't be visible from the treetops for another 30 to 45 minutes. Another hour passed until sunrise. I was on mile 5. I'm in a low bottom that's wedged between the two steep ridges. The trail I'm on was narrow, muddy, and completely hemmed in by thick underbrush, young maple and oak. I'm confused, but focused on a small light with my headlamp. And I did hear what I think I did, a loud crack. I freeze solid. This is a part I'm having trouble describing. 04:30 in springtimes means I am the only thing making noise. No birds chirping, nothing. It's literally dead quiet. Mid-step I froze. Now it's just me and my fight or flight reaction. The thought instantly flashes in my mind as I stood there bracing myself into silence. If I hear that again, I'm turning round and leaving in a hurry. Why? Because that sound was not a branch breaking, nor a deadfall. It wasn't a widowmaker. I was damn sure that whatever did that done so intentionally towards me. Hearing it twice, well, God. To describe it as best I can, it sounded like a big piece of wood being violently smashed against a tree. More like a baseball bat, to be honest. The distinction in my head being that this sounded like a crack, not a thud or thump, as I have described it as an explosion. It's such a horrifying sound to me now. So I stood there, completely spooked. I realised the soon-to-be worst part of my situation. I knew where the sound come from. I knew where the trail went. In about 30 yards, I was gonna come to a 180-degree turn and start up the ridge going away from the creek. This meant as soon as I got the courage to move towards the noises, I was gonna have to turn back to it and get up that ridge. I'm nervous now. My head somewhere between meth find murder and Bigfoot. Minutes pass, I just breathe. With the fog misting up on my glasses,
and there's nothing. Dead quiet. I've got about 30 minutes until first light. I crank up the headlight and start to slowly creep to the 180-degree turn. When you wear a headlamp in the woods at night, every branch can cast 1,000 shadows. Without moonlight, there's little help. I get to the turn and quickly make the bend. I'm moving pretty fast now, trying to be quiet, taking tiny shallow breaths. Then I smell it. A stench hits me that I can't describe. Imagine being dead, rotten and cold and wet. I've actually worked scenes with humans who have expired in the past, and this was worse or similar. I kept walking fast. By the time I made it to the top of the ridge, I'm huffing. The first light's here. I didn't stop moving until the full light was out. I've never heard it again in the woods since then, and I've never had a smell like that before. I honestly have no idea what the hell that sound was, or what could have been strong enough to make it. A few years ago, when I was 17, I just graduated from high school and got my first job at a Christian camp near Yosemite in California over the summer. Mainly the people I worked with were great and really sweet Christian college kids, the good kinds. There was one guy though, I would say he's Carl. I didn't frankly like him. He was tall, handsome, charming, had golden curly brown hair and a smile that could stop your heart. His eyes though, they're dead. He never got those little crinkles in the corner of his eyes when he smiled, which suggests that it's not a real smile. It was like the top half of his face died. There were things I did not like about Carl off the bat. His eyes for one, the dead of his smile. He never asked for anything. He tried to twist your arm. He just very softly, very slowly tried to manipulate the situation to feel as though you owed him. Each time, it felt like a part of my brain shut down, like a slamming door, almost like I'm powerless to say no. I get along with most of the little cliques of the camp. No one really dislikes each other. As far as I knew, we just kind of broke off into groups based off what we like into our free time, or who we like the most. Carl though, seemed to make friends one-on-one with a clique. By the time he left the group, it was desolate. They were fighting, not speaking or trusting each other. I know this isn't a lot of evidence, but I'm trying to take a good picture mentally and describe it to you. Now one day, everyone in the camp decided to go friendzone. We tried out a lot of camp food and wanted real dinner, maybe seeing a movie or go bowling. I was off work last. Now, at camp, we had a sign out sheet. Being so close to Yosemite, we often went hiking, so if we had left, we put our name down along with where we're going, when we left and where we should be back, and when. This way, if anything happens, the search teams know where to go. So I put all my info into this sheet and head down to the parking lot. My friends had all divided up into their cars, and I jokingly asked if they forgot about me. They said Carl had said I could ride with him. I look around and I don't see Carl, although I seen his name on the sheet. All of the hair on my body stood on end. I was terrified to get in the car with this guy alone. He felt so wrong, just off. Just not right. I don't know how else to say it. My friends were telling me I have nothing to worry about and everything's gonna be fine. I saw Carl walking towards the parking lot with that dead smile on his face, and everything in me was seeming to get scared. I said that I was tired and wanted to stay in tonight, and Carl laid the charm trick on me, telling me what a night it's gonna be. I owed him because of God knows what, with this dead smirk on his face. I refuse. He gets mad. Told me I don't need to be such a horrible person. Finally, everyone figured out that I wouldn't be persuaded. I hugged one of my girlfriends goodbye, whispering in my ear not to ride with Carl back. When they all left, I walked back to the area with the sign out sheets to cross off my name, since obviously I wasn't going anywhere. I saw the sheet, saw where my name was, and my heart dropped. My name had already been erased. Where I live in college, I have to come back a long way to get to home. It's literally states away, so I'm used to driving for hours on my own. This is often through heavily forested roads, with little to no other cars on the journey. Now I don't mind, I just play some podcasts and really enjoy my time normally. However, one night would change that forever for me. So it was the end of semester, and I was ready to set off like normal, and I check my phone and I have a text off my mum. It says, "Be careful." I don't know why I have a really weird feeling about tonight. I laugh about it and think, yeah, she's always paranoid like that, and set off at around 10 at night. I should be home by about 5 in the morning, that means, so I can get in, sleep, and enjoy the day with my family. So I set off and all feels normal. I've got my music playing and I'm having a good time. Now I don't know why, I suddenly have this weird feeling come across me. I notice that my radio starts to act up too. Not like normal interference though that I've ever heard before. This is almost like it's being jammed. I just laugh and quickly switch my phone to podcast mode. Aliens are not going to stop me today, I laugh to myself, and I continue onwards. Now as I'm driving, I haven't seen one other car yet, but lo and behold, there's some kind of light as I'm approaching a bend. I slow down thinking it's another car, making sure I don't have an accident. But it doesn't seem to move. I think this is odd. As I get closer, I realise that it's just a torch that's been placed on the side of the road. It's as though a person's just put it there to look like a car's headlights. I think that's really odd, but decide to keep going, thinking maybe a road worker left it there by accident. I don't know, it could happen. Now as I'm driving, I switch the radio again to get a weather update, and I realise that the same jamming type thing is in place. I really don't want to worry myself and think I'm just being paranoid, so I press on. Now that's when I see the same thing up ahead again, except there's two. What giving it away is that one was dimmer than the other, but it was the same orange type of glow that the torch had from before. I'm certain that it's just going to be some road workers doing something, so I decide to slow down and roll my window down to let them know that they've left a torch on up the road and it might be dangerous to other drivers. As I do so, I see some people in high-vis jackets. When I'm slowing down though, I have a horrible feeling that something isn't right. My car slowly comes to a stop, and I decide to put my full beams on. I know some of you are gonna moan at me for this, but I didn't care about temporarily blinding someone to see what was going on. That's when I see it. There's 5 people wearing high-vis jackets, but something looks off about this. I can see that the people in the background are wearing all black and a high-vis jacket. That just isn't right. I'm confused as to what's going on. Why on earth would they wear all black and a high-vis jacket? It's almost like they're not actual road workers, but the two at the front are. I call out and say, "Hello? Are you guys from the government?" And there's no reply. As I'm waiting there, a horrifying grin comes across one of the workers' faces. As my eyes have adjusted to the darkness, I can see that there's more lights in the background. And I can see that the torches have been placed there just the same as before. Then suddenly, I can hear the sound of rustling around me. To my left, I can see that there's a group of people coming from the tree line. And, almost on cue, my headlights go back to normal mode automatically and I can't see the guys in front of me. Just as it goes off though, it gives one flash of light and I can see that the people in the trees are carrying a lead pipe and other objects. This is the most scared that I've ever been in my life, and my fight or flight kicks in. I desperately jam my car into reverse and floor it, panicking not knowing what to do. As I do so, it illuminates the silhouettes of at least 8 other people on the left side of me, waiting, coming to the tree line. As I'm reversing out of there, to my horror, they all come into the road and just stop, staring at me, all dressed in black. What's worse is that as I'm screaming, the light suddenly goes off from the torches and I can't see them any longer. I immediately do the quickest U-turn of my life and start heading in the opposite direction. I'm trying to get through to the police but I've got no signal. I speed the rest of the way home. In a terrified state, I'm crying to my mum. I don't know if they'd followed me or what. I made damn sure to get out of there as quick as I possibly could. I then file a police report. The worst thing? My mum doesn't believe me about any of this. She thinks it was just sleep-induced hallucinations. And that I was so tired I imagined all of it. That was about to change though when the police arrived, and they told me and my mum that they were so thankful for the report, and they've been tracking down a group of people who pretended to be road workers to then try and kidnap people. Apparently someone else nearly got caught earlier in the week, but sped away too when they tried to grab her. It just makes me sick to think that there's people like that out there in the world. But the fact that I was miles into deep forest with no one around to help if I needed it then. It was only God's grace that I spotted them and didn't actually get out. About a month ago, I moved into a house near the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. It's very secluded. Everything was great up until about a week ago, when this strange thing started happening. Not like paranormal, just strange. So I knew moving in, I'm gonna have about an acre to myself, which is nice. The acre itself is just about all thick dense woods. Towards the back you can't even go any deeper because the land is too rigid and the trees block a clear path into anything. Now I live alone in this tiny home. My brother and his dog are moving in a couple of weeks. The house is pretty small. It also has a basement with a sliding door to the backyard, which has a tiny little fence that can be knocked down completely if someone's trying to get over it. I decided that I was going to start fixing it up until my brother's dog becomes well trained. Now this is when the first creepy thing happened. I left to go to Lowe's just to buy one classic lump of wood for a fence, just enough to make sure a dog can't get his head over it or leap past it. Now as I was coming back home, I noticed a man on my doorstep, looking inside through my window, even though any person could have heard me pulling into the driveway. He doesn't flinch at all, even when I slam the door shut. Eventually at this point, I kind of uneasily said, "Can I help you?" to which he replied, "I'm just your neighbour and saying hello." I went out of my way to put the wood I was carrying in my hand down on the ground and went to shake his hand, and he didn't move again. He just stared at me. After this weird encounter, I was more just done with him, so I said that I'm very busy and I'm fixing my fence and it's nice to meet him. He stayed at the front of my house though for about another 2 minutes, watching me put all my wood inside the living room, looking into and around my house in the process. I'm thoroughly creeped out now. I just closed the door in his face and went about my business. About 2 days later, into fixing my fence, another woman, this one looking nicer and having put a little appearance into her look, greeted me kindly, telling me about herself. I call her Miss H. Now she started to talk to me, explaining how people don't normally move around here, and I was the first in about 11 years. She went on to explain the rest of my neighbourhood, whom I knew are around the same age as her, like to stay to themselves. After a pleasant talk with Miss H, I asked her, "What's up with the guy that I saw earlier?" She said that, well, he's about 6 foot, which you probably know, old but not too old, probably mid-50s and brown eyes, decent shape and grey hair. Miss H went on to explain that the person who lived here before me was a widow, and her teenage daughter, who was homeschooled, had left because this perv started to stalk her. She got on to say other things about this weird man, and eventually left it at that. Now last night, I thought I heard a tapping on my window at exactly 2:37 AM. I knew this because I looked at my clock. Now my window is a good 4 feet above the actual ground, and below it, I think it's just a figure of a bird or something, and maybe it's casted its shadow trying to get in. But no less than 2 minutes after silence, the tapping become 3 loud bangs. I immediately ran to the closet, grabbed my hunting .22 and hid under my bed. Peeking over, I see a figure looking in. After being scared for my life, I hear the familiar voice of the perv shouting, "I need your help." Not knowing what to do with myself, I threw my curtain open, and the only thing between his forehead and my .22 was a ½ inch of my glass. He didn't say a word. Not "don't shoot me," not "I need help," not "oh hey." He then pointed behind him to the fence. I then ran outside to see what he wanted. I still have the gun on me. I said, "What's wrong?" He said nothing, pointing to my fence. I look over, and this time I saw the fence had seemed to have been run over by a car, with mud tracks everywhere. How on earth had I not heard this? I look at the 50-something-year-old cars, of whom were dirty tire tracks that could have left this. I'm annoyed at what I saw and yell, "What the hell?" And then pull my finger on the trigger, when he finally replied, "That's your fence, isn't it?" Jumped in his car and quickly sped off. It's currently 3 PM on March 2nd, and I've scraped the entire fence idea out of sheer exhaustion and fear. This is really happening right now, and I'm really not sure what to do. What I'm about to tell you happened 2 days ago in southwest Sweden. It was around 5 PM in the afternoon, and I decided to meet up with one of my friends. We have moped scooters, and drove to the grocery store to get a snack for our small trip. After that, we head towards a beautiful sheep pasture that I had been to once and wanted to go to again. It's located maybe 15 minutes away from the centre of town. After a while, we come to a narrow road surrounded by a forest, since it rarely drives any kind of vehicles out there. I started to drive in the middle of the road, and sometimes even on the part of the road for approaching cars. One time, when I looked in my mirror, I saw my friend driving close to the edge. At first, I thought she was making a point that I should keep on my part. But then, she drove even closer to the edge, almost going in a ditch. I stop and wait for her to catch up. We're both kind of laughing, and I ask her what happened, and she said, "I got distracted by something weird by a tree and forgot the turn." We laugh and continue. Later, when we sat in the sheep pasture eating our snacks, we started talking about it again for some reason. I asked what she saw, and she described it as some kind of wooden plank that was nailed to a tree, and that it looks like a figure, person with just holes as eyes. My reaction was, "Oh yeah, really?" And we decided to relocate it on the way home. We stopped by the roads and I turned off the engine. When I look up, I spotted it right away. It was hanging in a tree, looking dead. Now, I immediately think of some cults that are known to operate in the area. Maybe they were worshipping this. I don't know. I have a picture saved on my phone of this and I'm really thinking of reporting it to the authorities. Something just doesn't feel right about it though. I have a horrible sense of evil when I look at this. I hope nothing too bad's happened here. I even got told that this could be a grave for something, as part of some of the sacrificial rituals that can take place there. I'm not really willing to go back to find out though.
Now I dog sit for a family friend. They prefer to have somebody stay at the house with the dogs. I grew up in a town in the middle of nowhere and love the countryside. So for me, this is like a staycation because I live in the city now and never have time to myself. Anyway, their house is out in the middle of nowhere. When I say nowhere, I really mean literally it takes 2 hours to get from work to this place. There is one neighbour within 5 miles and he lives directly across the street. I'm used to this where I'm from. It's supposed to give you the space you need but also help keep you safer knowing that you actually have somebody nearby. However, this guy has done nothing but make me feel unsafe as hell. So anyway, eventually I make it to Terry and Johnny's house and they're telling me the drill, when to feed the dogs, which are 2 super cute and spoiled Australian cattle dogs, watering the plants, etc. Then, as they're loading up their stuff to take it to the car, Terry says, "Oh, don't forget to tell her about Steve." Johnny says, "Oh, yeah, don't worry about the neighbour across the street. He's harmless. He drinks a lot, but he's harmless. Hell, the guy lost his license so many times, all he can do is go up and down on a moped. However, just in case, this is where we keep the gun. Steve has 3 Don't Tread on Me Confederate flags, 2 plain Confederate flags which are all hanging from his porch. Of course he's weird. He then takes me to his gun and explains that it's loaded if I want to use it, so I don't even need to cock it, just pull the trigger extra hard. At this point I'm like, whatever. You keep a gun in your house when it takes at least 45 minutes for the police to show up, so I get it. Still, I've got no worries. I'm used to drunken weirdos. I know how to handle them. I love this life in the middle of nowhere, and I've got 2 protective dogs that will attack on command, so I feel pretty safe. Terry and Johnny leave around 3 PM. I took the dogs for a walk and play some frisbee and begin to unload my stuff while they're still worn out from running. As I come back out for my second load of stuff, I hear the neighbour, Steve, slam his door, seemingly having a phone conversation. I hear him go, "Where the hell did you go?" The dogs are hearing him now and growling.
I tell them to stay calm. I then hear him say, "I don't care about my kids, screw you." And then he throws something on the unpaved road behind me. Turns out it's his cell phone. As I'm grabbing my stuff, the dogs start going crazy and run a few feet behind me, barking viciously. I drop my stuff and turn around to see the neighbour at the end of the driveway, 75 or 50 feet away, just staring at me. I tell the dogs to calm down and to get back on my side, and they do. I then give Steve a friendly wave, thinking this is weird. He then takes a step forward and says, "You alright?" in a manipulative voice. Steve is wearing dirty jeans, work boots, dirty red hoodie, and a red hat with Confederate flags on it. He also got brown dirty hair down to his shoulders and a beard that's probably 5 inches long. "Yeah, I'm okay," and I say my name. I'm just here sitting Johnny and Terry's dogs for the week. I look down at the dogs to see their reaction. They look as though they're about to attack him in a way I've never seen before. "How are you?" I ask him. "I'm Steve. Thanks for being a good neighbour and checking me." "I'm good. You okay?" And silence again. Now this silence lasts for probably a whole minute, and I figure, he's wasted. I need to get inside. So I turn around and finish grabbing my stuff. As I do so, I hear him take one more step on the gravel driveway and the dogs bark again. And Steve says, "I know them. They're not gonna hurt me. They're good dogs for sure. They won't hurt me." I begin feeling very uneasy, so I close my trunk and turn around to see if he's going to say anything else. I was about to tell him that I was going inside, and then, instead, awkwardly he says, "Yeah, yeah, what?" and yelled. I'm shocked and he says, "Yeah. I'm going inside now. Have a good night." I turn around and the dogs follow me. Steve instead continues to stand where I left him for literally 15 minutes later. Now this house doesn't have a front door. There's a side door at the back. The back door is the main door because of the front of the house has these big green privacy trees, so I can't even see him through the front window. You can't see either doors from the street. You have to come onto the property to see them. It's about 6 o'clock, and where I'm at, the sun starts going down around then, but doesn't usually get dark until 9:15 during the summer. Anyway, the dogs and I are on the couch, and I have my headphones on and I'm playing Red Dead Redemption 2 online. All of a sudden, the dogs flip out, running towards the back door, barking and growling. I'm like, what the hell? They don't usually do that unless somebody pulls in their car and they don't know who it is. I'm not having anyone over, so I grab my knife, which is close by, and start walking towards the back door. The dogs are still going crazy and I have no idea what they're looking at. I don't see anything, but then I look closer. I see mock tail lights in the driveway seemingly hiding behind my car. I then try and focus in and see that Steve is turned around staring at the back of the house from his moped, ducking behind my car. I get the dogs and try and be quiet. I need to see what he's doing. The dogs are still growling, but at least I've not given away my location right now. I watch him for 5 minutes. No movement, just a general creepy stare in my direction. I don't think he can see me, I'm not sure. He then shuts off his moped and proceeds to crouch next to my car, where I can see him now peeking into my car windows. I don't see him trying to get in, which is weird. He's not crouching now. Obviously he feels like nobody's watching and doesn't care. He stops looking into my car and turns to the house. Creepy as hell. At this point I text Terry and tell her that Steve is doing some weird stuff and I'm getting worried. I get a text back saying, "Call the cops if you feel unsafe." They know him. They can come talk to him. reminding me to tell you about the time he was standing out by the tree at 6 AM when I was leaving for work, and he was still there when we came back. We think he had a psychotic breakout. How comforting's that? So, I talk myself down some. This guy is wasted. However, if he starts getting close to the door, I'm calling the cops. Dumb idea, looking back, because the cops can take such a long time to get here. I'm watching him as he makes his second round looking at my car. He then gets on his moped and drives off, and he passes the window that faces the driveway. He's fed up, trying to make it so I wouldn't see him if I were watching TV. Now it's like 8 PM. The dogs are going crazy again. I look out, and now the moped is parked in plain view, and he's standing on the walkway just 30 feet from the house, staring and talking to himself. I previously turned off all the lights so that he can't really see in. I see him take a single step towards the door, now 30 feet away. I grab the gun. I've calmed the dogs down and they're in full protective mode. One dog to my left and one to the right. It's around 8:15 PM now, and I call the cops. I explain my situation, and the owners think that he had a psychotic breakdown. As I'm halfway through explaining this, I'm really scared for my safety, and the operator says, "Ma'am." She then says, "I'm sorry, but you're not located in our county. I have to transfer you to this one." Are you serious? The owner said that the cops in South know him very well and how to handle him. Isn't that the guy? Yes, ma'am, that is us, but you are located in a different county. This is not our jurisdiction. The guy who's bothering me lives in your county, that's why I'm calling you. And the operator transfers me to another one. When she answers a phone with the average 911, "What's your emergency?" I'm silent. I'm looking out the kitchen window. Steve's about 4 or 5 feet closer from before. I explain what's happening, and that I was transferred because apparently I'm not in their jurisdiction. She tells me to remain calm and turn on all the lights. I said no, the guy's waiting for me to do something like that. The doors are locked. I do have a firearm. If he enters, I will shoot. She then tells me that it's safest with the lights on. I turn on the lights. He notices. He then turns around to get on his moped and goes back home. I tell her what's happened. She said, "Do I want an officer?" I say, "Hell yeah." Apparently the cops in South in this state know him, but she transferred me to you. This is the third time he's come onto this property, and he's getting closer to the door and I'm not safe. Calm down, ma'am. We will still send somebody, however, based on where you're located, it's gonna take a while. I say that's fine. I say if she'll stay on the line. She says that it's not really possible because she has to take other calls, but to call back if anything else happens without hesitation. Now it's about 9 PM, and the sun is getting ready to set completely. Again, the dogs are going crazy. Now I'm getting real annoyed and walking around the house with a loaded gun, so if Steve sees me, he knows I have a gun. I look out the window and see his moped, but I don't see him. Where the hell is he? From the window in the kitchen, I can't see the back door. I go upstairs. One of the dogs follows and peeks through the window in the bathroom. Steve is on the back porch, lighting matches, throwing them down onto the wooden porch. He doesn't seem harmless anymore. He's talking to himself and twisting his head back and forth like he's getting warmed up for a fight, or having a conversation with multiple people. I start filming from upstairs. So now, I try and hide my phone, just in case he goes up for it. The sun is down and it's getting dark. He steps onto the door and starts knocking. He starts pounding on the door. I'm pretty good at staying calm in any situation, but my heart's beating. He then stops pounding the door, quickly turns away and runs to his moped and takes off even faster than I thought he could go. Not even a minute later, I see a cop pulling into the driveway. I mentioned to the dispatcher operator that
I have 2 dogs that will bark at the officer but will not attack. They are trained to be like this. I say I'm going to leave the firearm inside when I go to meet the officer. I meet the officer and the dogs don't growl, simply gave a bark, letting me know that someone's there. I went outside to meet him and told him that the guy just took off on a moped, and he says, "Oh yeah, I think I passed him." I explained that he is absolutely drunk or crazy and in his own world, and that normal people don't act this way. The cop basically shrugs off everything and says, "Well, are you gonna stay there the night?" I said no, I will leave the dogs overnight and come back in the morning. I ask him to stay while I pack up everything. I go inside, give the dogs lots of love and treats, and create what they need for the night. I take off and return the next day with my dad. My dad begins walking the perimeter to try and show him that the man is also staying here. Now, I'm a 24-year-old female. If you're wondering, then Steve, wearing the same dirty hat and outfit while holding a 24 case of Budweisers, is standing at the end of the driveway again. I'm watching him from the front window. I see my dad at the other end, and he sees him. Steve immediately turns around and goes back into the house. Now, I later learned that Steve has been to jail multiple times due to domestic abuse, and his kids can't even see him. He's very violent. No one knows how he gets money to get things. Terry and Johnny have never seen him leave for work. They've only seen him on his moped or 4-wheeler that he recently bought. I don't know who he thought I was, but every time he looked in my direction, I saw pure hatred in my eyes and evil intent. I'm really glad my dad came to stay with me, because God knows what would have happened if he didn't. I've been staffed at a summer camp for 5 years now. A long-standing tradition is that some of the senior staffers will regularly sneak out during night to drive into town to hang out and generally be hooligans. Me and 4 other guys pushed a car around the bend from the parking lot to avoid waking up the adults, then hopped inside and headed towards the town. After a couple of hours of jokes, by a job blast from Taco Bell, and teaching one of our goons how to drive in an empty parking lot, we're driving down country roads, joking around listening to music. That is, until we turn down a random road and something immediately feels off. It's about 3:30 AM and we start down a hill, and suddenly the road goes from asphalt to gravel to dirt. We noticed an old rusted out boat trailer on its side, a bunch of old tools, rotting piles of wood, and a general mess. When we reach the bottom of the hill, there's a big shed with a garage door that's wide open, and another shed seemingly made out of plywood with a door creaked open. There's a light just shining through, flickering from a fuse box right outside. The mood in the car changed in an instant. For a moment, we're all sat in silence, watching the flickering light. No one said anything, but we could all tell that something doesn't feel right. Eventually, to ease the tension that we're all feeling, we start to make a joke, jeering at one of our friends to go and turn the light off or open the door. However, suddenly, the door opens. The mood immediately changes. Nobody said anything. For the next few moments, they're a blur, but I can assure you that it was the fastest and early 2000s Toyota Camry has ever went off a road. All 5 of us are completely silent for the drive back. Something about the aura of that place felt off. To this day, I imagine sitting in the front seat of the car, and I start getting an uneasy feeling in my stomach. Who was behind that door? Why were they there at almost 4 in the morning? Why couldn't I see anybody else around, and why did it feel so off? Okay, so let me start by saying I'm a 23-year-old, At the time of this story, I was 19, 5'5", fat girl from England. My weight and country come into play later. So I would take my dog for walks at night. That was until this experience. Now, it's not the kind of dark where you can't see anything, but the kind where you can't make out much further in front of you. As a disclaimer, this is the middle of nowhere. We're in a village where everyone knows each other and strangers are rarely spotted. Now, a fair few of my neighbours walk late at night, and I meet most of them, and there's usually this 6'3", heavily tattooed 46-year-old man with two friendly big dogs, one Mastiff and another German Shepherd. We were great friends and still are. Now, on this particular night, I bumped into him, just ending his walk, which happened to be a couple of times, and it's no big worry. I'm around half an hour into my 45-minute walk in the woods, earphones in with music playing and just checking my phone to see what song's on next. I notice my dog is looking up as if he can see something. I assume it's another neighbour, fox or deer. I looked up calmly and I see a strange man standing about 20 foot away from me, holding a rifle. Not a dog. It wasn't hunting season and this is England, so you can't really get guns unless you're a farmer, let alone a rifle. He looks angry and stares at me. At this point, I remembered my head torch and he turns to look at me. He angles himself to my face. And at this point, I knew I couldn't turn around or run since I'm out of shape. I carry on walking. As we go past, my dog gives him a wide berth, which is very unusual because he's normally friendly and loves everyone. I'm very confused by this. Now, I shuffle past him and say evening. I try and speed walk out of there. I look over my shoulder as I'm about to leave the woods. I saw he hasn't moved an inch and he's still staring at me. I never walked alone at night again. This freaked me out so much because it never happened since and there's no hunters near me. I'm certain he was not meant to have that gun. And I'm sure I've heard a gun go off at some point around the time of my travels near then. Back in the early 90s, I was a kid, around 13 at the time of the incident. I used to stay at my grandparents' house a lot, out in a very rural area in SE, Arkansas. When I say very rural, I mean it was a series of networked dirt roads to get to their house. The closest neighbours besides my aunt and uncle, who lived about a quarter of a mile off a dirt road, was a mile away. This was very backwards and isolated from the rest of civilization. The closest town was a 10-mile trip away. It's in the middle of farmland and mostly woods. They had lived up in this house since my mum was a child and had both grown up a ways down the dirt road. Anyway, there was a general store roughly 3 or 4 miles down the network of dirt roads. Now this is your typical country dirt road shop. It's run by an old lady and her husband, and its customers only consisted of people who lived out there. Now one day, my grandmother said to me if I wanted to walk to the general store and get some milk, eggs and a few other miscellaneous items. I said sure. She gave me some money and I headed on my way. Now it was fairly early in the day and I had plenty of time to get back before dark, which I always made sure to do when I was out roaming. Things can get pretty creepy out in the backwoods of Arkansas after nightfall. It's a darkness unlike most people have actually experienced before, due to no light pollution, and not really many street lamps. Now me being a 13-year-old, had poor time management skills. I stopped at the bottom of a hill next to the small wooden bridge you have to cross and messed around at the creek creating crawdads and such. By the time I left the store, I realised it was quickly approaching night. This was fall, and darkness set upon the land very early.
I didn't want to be walking these lonely roads, especially not through the woods, so I go as quick as I can. I'm running and sprinting as much as possible, but it's not enough. By the time I'd made it back to the bottom of the hill near the ridge, it's almost completely dark, and there was an eerie sort of glow brought about by a very bright, nearly full moon that was rising. At the top of the hill was a road that's perfectly straight and flat, with the woods on the left side and a large hill on the right. About half a mile up from the top of the hill is my grandparents' house, and you can see it from there. As I top the hill, I can see the faint glow of lights at their house. I'm starting to feel a little bit better now, but I'm still not feeling very good. The field on the right was somewhat illuminated by the glow of the moon, and my eyes have only just adjusted to the darkness. As I walk up the road, I hear something from the left, behind me on the wooded side of the road. It sounded like leaves being rustled. I turned around and see nothing at first, but then, as my eyes began to focus, I see something in the ditch, a black shadowy shape slowly moving towards me. At first I think it's a dog, but then I realise it's way too large to be one. And then I realise it wasn't actually walking on 4 legs, it was kind of crawling, like a person. I stare for a moment, out of sheer confusement, trying to figure out what I was seeing, and then a jolt of fear shudders me as it dawns on me. Whatever this thing was had been trying to sneak up on me for a while. At that exact moment, this thing stood upright out of the ditch on its 2 feet like a normal person. It had the shape of a human, but long arms, legs and such. It stood roughly 7 to 8 feet in height and was completely covered in black or maybe dark brown hair. Its face is dark in colour, and I can't really recall seeing much in the way of features. It was no bear, that's for certain, or any other kind of animal that I know for that matter. I immediately dropped the bag of stuff I'd been carrying and bolted as fast as I could, trying to get towards my grandparents' house. I heard a heavy breathing and weird sound behind me, hearing footsteps on the gravel as whatever this thing is starts to chase me. Now, I didn't turn around to look because I didn't need to. I can hear it crashing into the woods, earth-shattering, and some ungodly scream coming out of that thing, a sound I've never heard before. By the time I reached my grandparents, my heart felt as though it was about to explode from my chest. It's a type of adrenaline that I've never had before. I must have been sprinting as fast as possible for half a mile. I flew into the house, and in an incoherent mess of hyperactive gibberish, tried to explain to my grandparents what happened. My grandmother didn't really seem to believe me, but did believe something scared me, which annoyed me, thinking it was some kind of dog. The next morning I woke up, and I can see my grandpa sitting outside on the porch, whittling wood underneath the shaded tree in front of the yard. As he often does, I went and sat down beside him in one of the old metal lawn chairs. He's a very rational man, down to earth, grown up and hunted in that area his entire life. He knew every square inch of it, mapped out into his mind. He knew every type of critter and creature that lived in the woods, what noises they made, where to find them, and how to catch them, etc. I'd only been hunting with him for a couple of years, but had been going out into these woods with him since I was pretty young, going on walks and such. He had passed a lot of knowledge down to me during those adventures. I spoke to him about what happened, and told him I knew what I saw. I wasn't being over exaggerative, and it wasn't due to my imagination. I wasn't making it up. And it definitely wasn't a dog. He knew that I wasn't some dumb 13-year-old kid. He knew what I saw was real. He stopped whittling, looked me right in the eyes and said, "I know what you saw. I've seen it there before too. There's something out in them woods that people don't understand, and that's someone that you don't want to mess with." I remember those words very clearly to those days, because it gave me affirmation but at the same time made me realise that whatever I'd seen was very real in existence and beyond my understanding. My grandpa then went on to tell me that far back in the woods, there are some cliffs. At the bottom of these cliffs in a cave. He told me that cave is where the creature lived. He once stumbled upon it a long time ago while hunting. He said he was standing on the top of the cliff looking at the creature fitting the same description, and it emerged and began to scream, throwing rocks at him. He said he took a shot at it, missed, and then this thing chased him. My grandpa was on top of the cliff, so in order to get back, he had to run a distance, but luckily he managed to put some good space between them. He said the whole way back home, he felt as though he was being watched, and kept hearing twigs snap behind him. He was certain that it was following him, stalking him. He made it home, and as he reached his front porch, he turns to look towards the trees, and he can see this thing peeking out behind a tree staring at him. Later that night, he said that my grandmother awoke in the early hours of morning to find large rocks being thrown at the house, as well as hearing an unholy sound screeching out of the creature. He said he could hear it walking around on the front porch, rattling the doorknobs, banging on the windows, and it sounded like it was muttering to itself in a low, deep voice. But it didn't sound like a normal language, just a bunch of gibberish. After a while, that thing went back to throwing some more rocks and howling. So my grandpa grabbed his shotgun and fired it off, and into the darkness where this thing's running into the woods. Now, he didn't know if he'd hit it or not. He said that was the last time he ever saw or heard from it. However, over the years, farmers would report cows being mutilated, or someone's hunting dog would go unexplainably missing, or somebody would have a story about some strange creature they'd seen. He said it only scared my grandmother beyond words, and she absolutely refused to talk about it ever, or even acknowledge that it happened, which explains her acting weird about it when I told her. I know it's a pretty far-fetched story, but please believe me, this is true. And till this day, I've never actually spoken of it to anyone other than my grandpa. This happened to me over a decade ago, but I'll never forget the feeling deep in my chest, both that night and the following morning when the true nature of the situation became apparent to me. It was late December in a small Texan town. We just received 5 inches of snow in the day. I can't remember what time it was. It's dark out and I'm playing in my room. It's important to note that my room was made up of 2 rooms, a mudroom with a door leading to our front and my actual bedroom. The door was an older style wooden door with an all old wood hardware and a window on the top half. It had a window shade, but that wouldn't stop anyone from looking in if they wanted. My room was the most front-faced, with my parents being to the back of the house. I was in my mudroom playing with my Hot Wheels when I felt weird. It felt like somebody's watching me. I was facing the door at this point and look up at the window. I was trying to focus on the little openings left by the window shade. I started looking for some reason and start running. After a while, I'm sure nobody's there, so I went back to playing. A few minutes later, I get the feeling again. This time, I didn't look up at the door, but instead, I looked towards the window. I was just hoping that it's all in my head. Just then, the most terrifying thing happened. There was a noise at the door. The doorknob's being touched. I was still, facing the door, completely frozen at the sound of the metallic doorknob. I don't know why or how, but it was moving, slowly turning, testing the lock. I want to move, but I'm frozen. It was like somebody glued over every joint in my body. My chest felt like a car was parked on it. My parents weren't immediately there, so I'm all on my own now. And suddenly,
The door knob is being yanked with force. The door was one that had been locked with a skeleton key, so the doorknob could move freely. There's 2 deadbolts. Whoever was on the other side just figured out the doorknob was free to open. As soon as I heard the doorknob turn all the way, I sprung up the wall about 5 feet. The door fell silent. I'm glued to the wall, unable to move. The doorknob continues to slowly move. Whoever did so started trying to budge on the door, trying to pry it open, pounding on the door with their foot, kicking it. I froze until I started screaming for my life. I sprinted to the back of the house to get my parents. They asked me what's wrong, and I said somebody's tried to break in. They ran inside and checked, not bothering to check outside, which I pleaded with them to do. They said it's my imagination running wild or an animal. They took one final look and said go to bed. It took me hours. I don't even remember going to sleep. All I remember is staring at the doorknob from my bed, never taking my eyes off of it. Suddenly, I woke up to my parents, who were obviously distressed and scared. My mum grabbed me by the shoulders, getting in front of me. She asked very sternly why I thought somebody tried to break in. When I say, they listen. I was worried about how serious they were suddenly. When I thought they said it was my imagination, they took me to the front door, then to the backyard door, and pointed to the door near the driveway. You can clearly see boot prints in the snow walking along the street. Through our yard and straight to the window, then my mudroom door. This is where I'd been playing the night prior. The police showed up and took a report, but nothing ever come of it. I was never able to sleep well in that house again. I can never forget what it felt like as a child going through this and to have my parents not believe me. I'm just glad I wasn't home alone, and thank God for the deadbolts.